Welcome to Health Simplified. Seems like everyone's talking about fasting these days. It's gone way beyond just a diet trend, right? I have to say, you sent me a ton of research on fasting, especially for longevity and health. And, well, I gotta admit, I'm hooked. What's really jumped out at you from all this stuff?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? It's like science is finally catching up with what a lot of cultures have known for centuries. Fasting, it's not new, but the benefits, well, they're pretty amazing. And the really cool part, now we're starting to get why it works, like the actual biology behind it.
Okay, so let's get into that. What's actually going on in our bodies when we fast?
So our bodies are super adaptable. When we don't eat for a while, they have to find a different energy source, right? Usually we use glucose from carbs, but during a fast, we burn through those glucose stores. So guess what? Our bodies get smart and switch to burning fat for fuel instead.
Wow, so we're talking like a total metabolic switch up.
You got it. It's called lipolysis. And this process, well, it leads to more ketone bodies. These are molecules that our liver makes from fatty acids. And guess what? Our brains and other organs can actually use these ketones as fuel.
No way. Our bodies can actually run on fat. That's wild.
It is, right. But it's not just about keeping things running. It seems like this shift to ketones has a whole bunch of positive effects on our health. There's research that suggests this could even help protect against neurodegenerative diseases and even some cancers.
Hold on, so we're not just talking about weight loss here. We're talking about possibly preventing diseases and even living longer.
You got it.
Yeah.
There's actually a growing field of research called Gerontology. Basically, it's the study of staying young. A scientist named Dr. Valter Longo, he's been doing some groundbreaking work suggesting that cycles of this special fasting-mimicking diet could actually reset our systems, like at the cellular level.
Uventology. Okay, I love that. So what exactly is a fasting mimicking diet? Is it tricking your body into thinking it's fasting?
Pretty much. You're drastically cutting calories for a short time. It's like a fast, but you're still getting some nutrients. And what this does is it seems to trigger your body's natural repair mechanisms, which basically rejuvenates your cells.
That's incredible. And they've actually seen positive effects on aging and disease risk with this.
Yep. They've done studies, both on animals and humans, and the results with the fasting mimicking diet are really promising. We're talking about potentially lowering the risk of serious stuff like cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. And get this, there's even evidence that fasting can make chemotherapy more effective. It seems to protect healthy cells while making those cancer cells more vulnerable.
Wow, that's incredible. So fasting could actually change how we treat cancer in the future.
It's definitely a super exciting area of research, although of course it's still early. But here's the thing. While this cellular regeneration that fasting triggers is generally a good thing, there are some potential downsides to think about.
You're like what? You mentioned a possible link to cancer earlier, right?
Right, so it turns out that if there are any mutations during the stem cell regeneration process, it could increase the risk of cancer. So fasting can be like hitting the refresh button for our tissues and organs, but we need to be aware of that balance.
That's a really important point. So it's not about fasting all the time, right? It's more about doing it strategically to get the most benefits.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the nuances, figuring out what works best for each person, and of course being cautious and getting advice from a doctor.
Okay, this is already mind-blowing. We've gone from metabolic switches to ketone bodies, slowing down aging, and even stem cell regeneration. And we haven't even talked about the different types of fasting and how to actually do them.
Great point. There are all sorts of fasting methods out there, each with its own pros and cons. We should definitely dig into those. So welcome back to our deep dive into fasting. We've already learned a lot about what happens in our bodies when we fast, but now let's talk about the different ways to actually do it.
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. You mentioned intermittent fasting, water fasting, and even something called a fasting mimicking diet. Could you break those down for us?
Of course. Let's start with intermittent fasting, or IF as most people call it. It's become pretty popular lately, and the idea isn't about what you eat, but when you eat.
Right, I've heard about different IF schedules, like different ways to do it. What are some of the most common ones?
So two of the most popular methods are the 168 method and the 5.2 diet. With the 168 method, you fast for 16 hours every day, and then you have an 8-hour window to eat all your meals. So you might skip breakfast and eat your first meal at noon, and then finish your last meal by 8 p.m.
Okay, that seems pretty manageable. I could actually see myself trying that.
Yeah, it's a good option for a lot of people because it's pretty easy to fit into your daily routine. Then there's the 5.2 diet, where you eat normally for 5 days a week, and then for 2 non-consecutive days, you restrict your calories to 500, 600.
So that's like a weekly cycle instead of a daily one.
Mm.
Interesting.
Exactly. And both of these methods, they've actually shown some pretty promising results in studies, but it really comes down to finding what works best for you, you know, your
Yeah.
lifestyle, your preferences.
What about those other methods you mentioned, like water fasting and the fasting-mimicking diet? Those sound kind of intense.
Yeah, those are more specialized approaches. And honestly, you should definitely talk to your doctor before trying them. Water fasting is just what it sounds like. You only drink water for a specific period of time, no food at all. It can be pretty challenging, and usually it's only done for short periods under medical supervision.
Yeah, I can imagine. What about the fasting-mimicking diet? How does that work?
This one's pretty fascinating. It was actually developed by Dr. Longo, who we talked about earlier. It's basically a very low-calorie diet for a short time, usually 5 days. The idea is to mimic the effects of fasting while still getting some essential nutrients.
So it's like a more controlled way to get the benefits of a longer fast.
Exactly. And the studies on this are pretty exciting, especially when it comes to reducing the risk of chronic diseases and boosting cellular regeneration. But again, as with any kind of fasting, talking to your doctor first is super important.
This is all so interesting. It seems like fasting can really do a lot, from weight loss to preventing disease, and maybe even slowing down aging. But I'm curious, are there any downsides or risks we should know about?
You're right, that's something we should always consider. Fasting isn't for everyone, and it's important to be aware of the potential risks and approach it carefully.
So what are some things people should be cautious about?
Well, like we mentioned before, there's that potential increased risk of cancer if mutations happen during stem cell regeneration. That's why it's so important to talk to your doctor, especially if you have any health conditions.
Makes sense. What other risks should people be aware of?
Fasting can also cause some side effects, especially when you're first starting out, like headaches, fatigue, dizziness, low blood sugar. It's really important to listen to your body and adjust as needed.
So it's not about just pushing through any discomfort you feel.
No, not at all. You really have to pay attention to what your body's telling you. And if you have any severe or persistent side effects, talk to your doctor.
That's good to know. So while fasting can be really powerful for our health, we have to approach it carefully and get personalized guidance.
Absolutely. And remember, fasting isn't a magic solution. It's a lifestyle change. And it takes commitment and consistency to see those long-term benefits.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I'm starting to see fasting in a whole new way. It's not just about losing weight. It's about improving your health and maybe even living longer.
Yeah, it's about way more than just weight loss. It has the potential to affect everything from your metabolism to how your cells function, even your lifespan.
It's amazing how our bodies respond to not eating for a period of time. But before we wrap up, there's one thing we haven't talked about yet. The refeeding stage.
Good point. What you do after you fast is just as important as the fast itself.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell us more about why that's so important.
I will. That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our depth dive. Stay tuned because the journey of fasting, well, it doesn't end when you break the fast. It's just the beginning of another really important phase.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive on fasting, and I'm really excited to hear more about this refeeding stage you mentioned. It sounds pretty crucial.
Yeah, it really is. A lot of people get so focused on the fasting part itself, but what you do after you fast is just as important.
So tell me, why is the refeeding stage so important?
Well, think about it this way. Fasting is like a cleanse for your body, like hitting the reset button. You're giving your digestive system a break so it can focus on repairing and rejuvenating itself.
Okay, that makes sense. So what happens when we start eating again after a fast?
That's where the magic happens, right? Your body is primed and ready to absorb nutrients and rebuild tissues. It's like a sponge, ready to soak up everything you give it.
So we really need to be careful about what we eat after a fast.
Absolutely. If you break your fast with junk food, sugary drinks, or a ton of unhealthy fats, you could actually undo a lot of the good you've done.
Got it. So what should we be eating during the refeeding stage?
It's all about nourishing your body with good, healthy stuff. Think fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, healthy fats, whole grains, the good stuff.
So it's like a fresh start for our eating habits, too.
Exactly. It's a chance to reset your relationship with food and make healthier choices.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I'm starting to see fasting in a completely different way. It's not just about weight loss. It's like a way to boost our overall health and maybe even live longer.
That's exactly it. Fasting, when done right and safely, can have such a huge impact on our well-being, physically or mentally, even emotionally.
Before we wrap things up, do you have any final advice for our listeners who might be thinking about trying fasting?
Definitely. The most important thing is to talk to your doctor first, Make sure fasting is right for you and get some personalized guidance. Don't jump into anything extreme without preparing properly and having some supervision.
That's great advice. Anything else?
Yeah, just listen to your body, Pay attention to how you're feeling and adjust your fasting approach as needed. It's not a competition, it's a journey. And one last thing. Focus on eating healthy foods during that refeeding stage to get the most out of your fast.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into fasting. I've learned so much. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure. Fasting is such an interesting topic, and I'm always happy to talk about it.
Thank you for taking the time out to listen to our deep dive. Until next time, stay healthy and stay informed.